They locked me out before sunrise, and my phone buzzed with something I was never meant to hear. I'm a woman living in a Georgia suburb where family smiles cover things nobody says out loud. The porch light flickered like it was tired of keeping secrets. Dawn hadn't fully shown up yet. Everything felt paused, like the world was holding its breath right along with me. If stories like this hit close to home, go ahead and like, subscribe, and tell me what city you're listening from. I read those, and I see you. I stood on the welcome mat I bought years ago. The letters faded from sun and rain. Welcome home. Funny thing for a door that wouldn't open. The key felt colder than it should have, metal biting into my fingers as I slid it into the lock the way I always had. No rush, muscle memory. Twist to the right. Nothing. I tried again, slower this time, like patience might change the metal, like it might remember me. It didn't. Inside, the television murmured low. Morning news cadence. A man talking traffic, a woman laughing softly at something off-screen. Normal sounds, house sounds, the kind that say, life's moving along just fine. Without me. I leaned closer to the glass. The porch light buzzed overhead, flickered once more, then steadied. My reflection floated back at me in the dark pane, hair pulled back, coat grabbed without thinking, eyes looking like they hadn't slept enough, or maybe slept too much and still woke up tired. I looked like someone waiting to be let in. The air smelled damp, pine from the trees along the street, cold metal from the railing under my hand. That early morning chill crept under my collar before I realized I was shivering. I stood there longer than I should have, expecting footsteps, a voice, my name. Nothing came. I pressed my ear to the door. The wood was cool against my cheek. Inside, a spoon clinked against a mug, coffee maybe. Someone coughed. Familiar. Too familiar. I stepped back. This was my house. I paid for this lock. I remembered the hardware aisle, debating brass or silver, thinking brass felt warmer. The guy behind the counter asking if I wanted extra keys. I said no, one was enough. I didn't lose things back then. I looked down at the key, scratched from years of use, then just slightly at the tip. It had opened this door through storms, holidays, nights I came home late, and mornings I left before sunrise. Now it just didn't. I tried the knob without the key. A useless habit. It rattled softly, like it was embarrassed for me. Across the street, Mrs. Calder's porch light was still on. Her curtains shifted, then settled. I wondered if she saw me standing there, if she was already building a story. I straightened my coat. This didn't feel like an accident. Accidents are messy. This felt clean, intentional, like someone turned the lock and walked away without looking back. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts, just the time glowing back at me. Too early, too quiet. The house looked different from the outside when you couldn't get in. Windows like eyes that wouldn't meet yours. The front door heavier, more serious, less forgiving. I knocked once, not loud, just enough to say, I'm here. The TV inside dipped quieter, or maybe I imagined it. I waited. Dinner from the night before slid into my head without asking. Plates scraped clean, my son quiet, her smile sharp at the edges. No warnings about the morning, no casual, we're heading out early, nothing. I'd gone to bed thinking it was just another night. I knocked again, harder. Hello? My voice sounded louder than I meant it to, thinner too. I stepped off the porch, onto the walkway. Cold seeped through my shoes, gravel crunching too loud in the quiet. I looked back at the door. The porch light flickered again. I laughed once, short and disbelieving. This is stupid, I said to nobody. I tried the key one more time. Still nothing. Inside, the anchor moved on to weather. Rain later, possible storms. I wondered if the house would still be warm when I came back. If I came back. I wrapped my arms around myself. Not from the cold, but from the feeling climbing my spine. That slow understanding that this wasn't a mistake, that someone inside made a choice. I walked to the end of the driveway and looked through the living room window. Curtains half open, morning light spilling in. Movement crossed the wall. Then another. I raised my hand, unsure who I was waving to. The shadow stopped. For a moment, I thought the door would open. I imagined an apology forming. Instead, the shadow moved away. The TV volume went back up. That's when it hit me. They knew. My chest tightened. Not sharp, just heavy. I breathed the way I'd learned to years ago, slow and careful. I sat on the bottom step. The wood was damp and cold. I didn't care. I stared at the door like it might explain itself. I thought about all the times I'd opened it without thinking. Groceries, laughter, holding it for people who said thank you and people who didn't. A house keeps memories, even when it doesn't keep you. A car passed at the end of the street. Somewhere a bird tried a morning song, then stopped. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. I considered calling, his name, then hers. I didn't press either. I wanted to see how long it would take before someone noticed I wasn't inside. Time stretched. Sounds grew louder. The hum in the porch light, a distant dog, my own breathing too steady for how I felt. Finally, the handle turned. I stood so fast my knees complained. The door opened a crack. Warm air brushed my face. Coffee, toast, normal morning smells. Her face appeared. She smiled. Not wide, not surprised. Just enough. "Oh," she said, "you're up early." "I couldn't get in," I said. She glanced at the lock, then back at me. "Huh, that's weird." She didn't open the door wider. Inside, the TV kept talking. Behind her, my son's shoulder disappeared down the hallway. She held the door like a boundary. I nodded. Yeah, weird. The porch light buzzed softly above us. And standing there, half in the cold and half in the truth, I realized this wasn't about a lock at all. It was about being shut out, and I didn't yet know how far back that door had closed. The coffee was already losing its heat by the time I sat down in the driver's seat. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, hands wrapped around the cup, steam curling up once before giving up. The lid was snapped on crooked, the cardboard sleeve soft from warmth. I couldn't remember ordering it, only needing something hot to hold on to. The car stayed quiet. No radio, no hum, just the faint ticking of the dashboard clock, counting seconds like it had nowhere else to be. From the street, the house didn't look like mine anymore. It sat steady and calm, porch light still glowing, even though the sun was creeping up behind the trees. The windows shone faint, half awake, like eyes that already knew the day's routine. I stared at it through the windshield and realized how different a place looks when you're not inside it, how easy it is for it to close itself off. Standing on the street made it feel smaller somehow, less forgiving. I took a sip of coffee, lukewarm, bitter, and swallowed it anyway, tightening my hands around the cup, not shaking, just holding on. I told myself to breathe, slow, normal, locks jam, people sleep through knocks, mornings go sideways all the time. But the house didn't look sideways. It looked prepared. My eyes drifted to the front window, curtains half open exactly how I'd left them the night before, and I could almost see myself standing there after dinner, stacking plates that were still warm. Dinner came back to me without warning. The three of us at the table, food made with care, eaten without much talk. My son barely touching his fork, pushing things around, nodding when spoken to. Quiet in a way that felt practiced. She'd laughed too much, quick, sharp, cutting off silence before it could settle. I remembered watching her hands, always moving, never still. Nobody mentioned plans. Nobody said anything about the morning. No warning, no casual, "we're heading out early tomorrow." I went to bed thinking it was just another night. I stared at the steering wheel, tracing the worn spot where my thumb always rested. The clock ticked louder than it should have. I checked my phone again. No notifications, no missed calls, no apology waiting to arrive, just the time. I set the phone face down on the seat like it might speak if I stopped watching it. A car passed slowly at the end of the street, tires whispering over pavement. Someone heading somewhere they belonged. I took another sip of coffee, colder now. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes for a second, telling myself not to assume the worst, the way I always did. Wait, give space, let things explain themselves. When I opened my eyes, the house looked back. I noticed things I hadn't before. A kitchen light on, a shadow moving past it, then gone. The front door stayed closed. They were awake. That settled heavy in my chest. Sleep could excuse a lot. Being awake meant awareness. I wondered how long I'd stood on the porch before I walked away, whether they'd heard the key, the knock, my voice, whether they waited. The thought slid in slow and uncomfortable. What if they were watching? I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt, like the car wasn't hiding me at all. I remembered my son avoiding my eyes at dinner, how she answered questions meant for him, the pause when I said goodnight. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Sitting there now, it felt like a warning I'd ignored. The clock ticked again. I thought about calling him, saying my name into the phone, reminding him I existed. I picked it up, his name glowing back at me, familiar and distant all at once. I didn't press it. Something stopped me. Pride, maybe, or the need to see how far this would go without me forcing my way back in. I wanted to know what they would choose. I set the phone down. The coffee was almost cold. I drank it anyway, grimacing at the taste. I studied the house like I was already remembering it, the way the light hit the siding, the porch step that dipped in the middle, the scratch on the door I always meant to fix. It felt like I was saying goodbye without knowing it yet. A bird landed on the mailbox, tilted its head, then flew off like it decided the spot wasn't safe. I exhaled slowly and told myself again not to jump to conclusions, even as my shoulders stayed tight and my jaw clenched. I wondered what they were doing in there while I sat outside, if they were talking about me, if they were pretending I wasn't there at all. I pictured her in the kitchen with her phone, my son pacing, voices low, decisions being made without me. I shook my head slightly, trying to clear the image, but it stuck. Not knowing didn't make it hurt less. The house felt farther away the longer I sat there, like the space between us was stretching on purpose. I adjusted the rearview mirror and caught my own eyes. Tired, not surprised, just resigned. I didn't look like someone locked out by accident. I looked like someone being eased out. The porch light finally clicked off. That did something to me. I sat there a moment longer, coffee cup empty, hands still wrapped around it like it could anchor me. I didn't start the engine. I waited to see if anyone would come out. They didn't. And sitting there, watching the place I called home breed without me, I realized this wasn't just a bad morning. It was the beginning of something I hadn't been invited into, and I still didn't know what they'd been doing while I waited outside.
The door opened slow, not startled, not rushed, just enough to let warm air spill out like it had been waiting. She smiled, the kind of smile people use when they already decided how a moment's supposed to go. Calm, polite, settled. She said my name softly, careful, like she was setting something fragile down instead of greeting a person. For half a second, I almost believed it was normal. The house smelled clean, not lived-in clean, but clean. Lemon and something sharp, like disinfectant, the kind of smell that tries to erase evidence. I stepped inside, the floor warmer than I expected, heat running steady like nothing was wrong, like I hadn't just been standing outside questioning my own memory. She moved aside to let me pass, still smiling, still watching my face. Her eyes were focused, alert, not confused. Behind her, my son stood near the hallway, hands buried in his pockets, shoulders rounded forward. His gaze stayed fixed on a spot just past my shoulder, like if he didn't look at me, he wouldn't have to explain anything. "Morning," she said. I nodded, took off my coat, hung it on the same hook it's always been on. The motion felt automatic, like my body hadn't caught up yet. The TV hummed low in the living room, morning news again. Same voices, same calm delivery. I looked at the lock. Same brass finish, same small scratch near the edge. Nothing looked broken. She followed my eyes. "Must have jammed," she said lightly. "You know how these things are. Technology's funny like that." Technology. I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "Funny." My chest tightened, not panic, just pressure, like a door closing somewhere inside me. She walked toward the kitchen, talking about coffee like this was just another morning, asking if I wanted some, if I slept okay. Her voice never wavered. Too even. The counters gleamed, no crumbs, no dishes. The rug by the sink was straightened perfectly. She'd always hated crooked things. I caught my son's reflection in the microwave door. He still wouldn't look at me. "You okay?" I asked him. He nodded once, quick, and said nothing. Silence stretched until she filled it again. "Locks do that sometimes," she said, pouring coffee, "especially older ones." Older. I watched her hands, confident, steady, not shaken. If this had been an accident, she would have been flustered, apologetic. She wasn't. She handed me a mug, warm, fresh, like it had been waiting for me all along. I wrapped my hands around it. The heat didn't slow my heart. I glanced at the clock on the wall. Time had moved forward without me. "So," I said quietly, "how long were you up?" She didn't miss a beat. "Oh, not long, just getting things ready." Getting things ready for what? My son shifted his weight, foot tapping once, then stopping, a nervous habit from when he was younger. I took a sip of coffee, too hot, burning my tongue, and welcomed the sting. I looked around the kitchen like I was seeing it for the first time. Frames moved, magnets rearranged, a note by the calendar in her neat handwriting, none of mine. "You didn't hear me knock?" I asked. She tilted her head, measuring. "I thought I heard something, but the TV was on." I nodded. "Guess it happens." My son finally looked up then, just for a second. His eyes met mine and slid away fast. That hurt more than the locked door. I sat at the table, the chairs scraped softly against the floor, too loud in the quiet. She sat across from me, close but not too close, and set her phone on the counter behind her, screen down. I noticed. "So," she said, "everything's fine now?" It wasn't a question. I stared at my coffee, watched the surface ripple as my hand trembled just a little. "Yeah," I said, "fine." The word felt heavy. She smiled again, same calm smile. I wondered how long she'd practiced it. The house hummed around us, covering whatever sat underneath. I thought about the porch, the cold, the waiting. I thought about how long she'd stood on the other side of that door before opening it. My chest tightened again. I didn't call her out, didn't ask why she didn't open it sooner, why the lock only jammed for me, why this felt rehearsed. I let it sit. Sometimes the truth shows up on its own if you give it room. She talked about errands, appointments, normal things. My son nodded along, adding nothing. I listened and pretended, staying alert, watching how she answered for him, how he deferred, how the house felt arranged. When she laughed, it didn't reach her eyes. When my son smiled, it looked forced. I finished my coffee and stood. "I'm going to go sit for a bit," I said. She nodded. "Of course." As I walked away, I felt her eyes on my back, not warm, not hostile, just aware, like she was making sure everything stayed where she put it. I sat on the couch, the cushion dipping the same way it always had, familiar but not comforting. Behind me, her voice dropped lower as she spoke to my son, words too soft to catch. I didn't turn around. I stared at the blank TV screen, my reflection faint in the glass. I looked tired. I looked like someone who knew a story didn't add up. The smell of cleaner lingered in the air, sharp and artificial, like the house was trying to be something it wasn't. I leaned back and closed my eyes, telling myself not to jump to conclusions, even though deep down I already knew. That calm face wasn't kindness, it was control, and whatever she was covering for, I hadn't seen it yet.
The house sounded different at night, like it was holding its breath. The kitchen light was the only one on, everything else dark and tucked away behind closed doors and unspoken thoughts. I was rinsing a mug when she said my name from the doorway, soft and even, asking if I could sit with her for a minute. It didn't sound like a question. I dried my hands slowly, the towel rough against my palms, and noticed the clock on the stove blinking the same time it always did, a minute fast, like it liked staying ahead. I sat at the table. The overhead light buzzed faintly, just enough to notice once I was already uneasy. It cast a pale circle over the wood, highlighting every scratch and old mark left behind from years of living. She sat across from me, careful and centered, and placed her phone on the table between us, face down, gentle, like she didn't want to wake it. My stomach dropped before she said a word. The phone didn't belong there. It felt deliberate, positioned. She folded her hands. "I've been keeping records," she said. The word landed heavy, official, like something meant for an office, not a kitchen where I'd once taught my son how to stir gravy without spilling. I didn't speak. She glanced at the phone, then back at me, still calm, still steady. "Just conversations," she added, "to be safe." Safe from what? I wondered, my mouth growing dry as I swallowed anyway. She turned the phone over. The screen lit up, reflecting in her eyes. Dates, times. My heart started beating louder, like it wanted out. She tapped the screen and the speaker icon lit up, and then my voice filled the room. Not how I hear myself in my head, sharper, flatter, colder. I recognized the moment immediately. A conversation from weeks ago, sitting at this same table, talking about money, about the house, about how things would work long term. Back then, it felt careful and measured. Through the phone speaker, it sounded harsh. She let it play. I heard my pauses, my hesitations, the way I chose words. I heard how she stayed quiet, letting me fill the space. I heard my son speak once, then disappear. The room had felt warm that day. Now it felt cold. She stopped the recording before it ended. "That's one," she said, like she was counting inventory. I stared at the table, tracing a small burn mark from a candle years ago without thinking. She played another, a different night. I remembered it too. Me tired, less careful, saying things out loud that should have stayed thoughts. In my memory, I'd been venting. On the recording, it sounded accusatory, demanding. Heat crept up my neck. She watched my face while it played, not listening anymore, just observing. When it stopped, the buzz from the light filled the silence. "I didn't know," I said finally, my voice low and rough. She tilted her head slightly. "I didn't think you did," she said. "That's why I kept them." Kept them, like proof, like something to pull out later. My chest tightened. "How long?" I asked. She waited before answering. "Long enough." I nodded, thinking about all the conversations I thought were safe, how many of them had been saved. "What are you planning to do with them?" I asked. She folded her hands again. "Nothing," she said, "unless I need to." There it was. I leaned back, the chair creaking softly beneath me. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," I said. She nodded. "I know. Intent doesn't always matter." My son appeared in the doorway then, silent, listening, his presence heavier than words. I looked at him. He stared at the floor. That hurt more than the recordings. She slid the phone closer to herself.
I needed to protect us, she said. You understand that, right? Protect from me. I wanted to argue, to explain that context mattered, that family conversations weren't evidence, but I could hear myself on that phone. Even if the truth was softer, the sound was real. I trusted you, I said. Her expression didn't change. We trusted you, too, she replied. That's why we listened. The light buzzed again. I looked around the kitchen. The same walls, the same table, a room where laughter used to live easy. It felt different now, like a place where words were collected and stored. I stood slowly. She looked surprised, just for a second. I need some air, I said. She nodded like she expected it. Outside, the night hit me cool and clean. I stood on the porch, listening to insects and distant cars, the kitchen light glowing behind me. I pictured the phone still sitting there, full of my words, my pauses, my trust. The locked door that morning made sense now. This wasn't new, it was documented. I leaned against the railing and closed my eyes, realizing she hadn't saved my words to remember me. She saved them in case she needed to use them. And that changed everything.
The eggs burned before either of us noticed. The pan sat on the stove, heat too high, edges curling and browning where they shouldn't, the smell creeping in slow until it finally broke the silence. I turned the burner off. Neither of us said anything about it. The kitchen felt too still for a morning. My son sat at the table with his elbows resting where a plate should have been, rubbing his hands together like he was cold, even though the house was warm. Morning light came in thin and pale through the window, not softening anything, just making it clearer. I scraped the eggs into the trash, listening to the dull sound as they hit the bag, and then turned back to him. He still hadn't looked up. I sat across from him, the chair legs scraping louder than they should have. He flinched just a little, then stilled. "You hungry?" I asked. He shook his head. "No." His voice barely carried. I watched his face, the same face I'd known since he was born. Same lines, same shape, but folded inward now, like he was trying to take up less space. The clock ticked on the wall. I waited. His hands kept moving. "I just want to understand," I said finally, keeping my voice even. "That's all." He nodded without lifting his eyes. "Things got complicated," he said. The word landed heavy. "Complicated always does." "Complicated how?" I asked. He shrugged, small and defensive. "We were just trying to handle stuff." That phrase hit harder than yelling ever could. Handle stuff. Like I was something to manage, not someone to talk to. I swallowed. "Stuff like what?" His hands stopped for a second, then started again. "You know, everything." "I don't," I said. "That's why I'm asking." Silence filled the space between us, thick and uncomfortable. Sunlight crept farther across the table, lighting up scratches and a water ring I never wiped away. "I didn't know you felt that way," I said softly. He finally looked up, just for a second. His eyes were tired, red at the edges. "I didn't want things to blow up," he said. "We were trying to keep things calm." "By locking me out?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "That wasn't supposed to happen like that." "Like what?" He looked away again. "I didn't think you'd notice." The words settled deep. I noticed everything. I always had. "You didn't think I'd notice," I repeated. He didn't answer. The clock kept ticking. "How long?" I asked. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair, the same nervous habit from when he was younger. "A while." I nodded slowly. "So you talked about me," I said, not accusing, just stating it. "Without me." He winced. "It wasn't like that." I tilted my head. "Then how was it?" He struggled, searching for words he didn't want to say. "She was worried," he said.
About the house, about money, about the future. And you? I asked. He hesitated. I didn't want anyone getting hurt. I let that sit. I'm already hurt, I said quietly. He looked up again, regret written all over his face. I know. I didn't know how to stop it once it started. That told me everything. He hadn't led this, but he'd allowed it. I leaned forward, hands flat on the table. When did I stop being part of the conversation? His throat moved as he swallowed. I don't know, he said. It just happened. Just happened, like something wearing away over time. I nodded, thinking about all the times I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace, all the trust I'd given freely. The smell of burnt eggs still lingered, faint but stubborn. I stood up. He looked startled. I'm not mad. I just need to think. He nodded. As I turned toward the sink, he spoke again. I didn't mean to shut you out. I stopped without turning around. But you did. I rinsed my hands, even though they weren't dirty, watching the water run clear. When I turned back, he was watching me, really watching me. For a moment, I saw the little boy in him, the one who used to ask me what to do when he messed up. But this wasn't something I could fix. I just wanted things to be easier, he said. I know, but easier for who? He didn't answer. The clock kept ticking. And standing there, listening to the house breathe around us, I understood what hurt the most. It wasn't the lock or the recordings. It was realizing my own son had learned how to talk about me without ever talking to me, and I didn't know how to find my way back into that conversation.
I walked through the house like I was visiting someone else's place, moving slow and careful, quiet enough not to interrupt whatever it had become. The hallway felt narrower, even though the walls hadn't moved. Same paint, same pictures, but the air felt different, like furniture remembers when it's been shifted without asking. The runner rug sat a few inches off from where it usually rested, not enough to trip over, just enough to notice if you knew it by heart. I stopped and looked down at it, remembering how I used to straighten it every morning, a small habit, a way of saying things were still in order. Now it sat crooked, like it had given up on waiting for me. The living room came next. The couch had been nudged closer to the wall. My chair by the window sat angled wrong, turned just enough that the light didn't hit it the same way. I stood there with my hands at my sides, letting the room show itself to me. The bookshelf looked fuller, not with more books, but with fewer spaces. Things pushed together, gaps closed. Control likes tight spaces. I ran my fingers along the back of the chair. The fabric felt the same, familiar, but it wasn't where I left it. Nothing was broken, nothing was obviously wrong. That's what made it worse. I opened the hallway closet. My coats were there, but pushed to one side, grouped tight. Her scarves draped neatly, shoes lined up like they were being inspected. I closed the door quietly. The house hummed around me, refrigerator, vents, pipes shifting. It sounded alive, just not with me in it. In the bedroom, the bed was made differently, corners sharp, pillows stacked instead of spread. My lamp had been turned inward, facing the wall. I picked it up and turned it back, like correcting a mistake no one planned on admitting. The dresser drawers slid open too easily. Someone had reorganized them. My shirts folded tighter, socks paired with precision, my things grouped together in a way that felt labeled without labels. I stared at the drawer, thinking about how I'd lived a little messy on purpose, not chaos, just room to breathe. This felt like preparation. I closed it. In the bathroom, my toothbrush sat in a different cup, same brand, different place. Under the sink, extra towels stacked neatly, my things pushed to the back. Borrowed, that's what it felt like I was borrowing space in my own life.
I leaned against the counter and listened as footsteps creaked somewhere in the house, then stopped. Her voice carried through a wall, low, controlled. She was on the phone. I couldn't make out the words at first, just the cadence, calm and practiced, like she was explaining something she'd already decided. I stayed still. The walls here had always been thin. "Yes," she said softly. "We're just being careful." A pause. "I know, but it's better this way." Better for who, I wondered. I stepped closer without meaning to, the floor sighing beneath me. Her voice dropped lower. "We're almost there," she said. "Just a little more time." Time. The word settled heavy in my chest. This wasn't about safety. It was about timing. I backed away slowly, like I didn't want the house to know I'd heard. In the spare room, boxes lined the wall, neatly labeled in her handwriting: seasonal, donations, storage. My name wasn't on anything. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress barely dipping, like it wasn't used to me anymore. I thought about the conversations that must have happened without me, whispered late at night, decisions shaped while I folded laundry or watched TV in the next room. Control doesn't always look harsh. Sometimes it looks tidy, responsible, quiet. I walked back into the hallway, the air thicker now, charged. The front door stood closed. The lock looked ordinary. I wondered how many times it had been turned when I wasn't around, how many rehearsals there'd been before that morning. I sat on the couch, feeling the cushion firmer than usual, or maybe I was just noticing everything now. I tried to remember when the shift started, the first small change, the first choice made without me. It wasn't one moment. It never is. It's a series of quiet agreements, trust given freely and taken carefully. Her footsteps passed the doorway again, phone clicking off, moving toward the kitchen without looking at me. Normal, casual, like nothing had changed. I stayed still and listened to the house breathe. Every wall, every corner had heard it all. Arguments whispered, plans debated, words recorded. The walls didn't forget, they just held it. I understood then how long this had been going on, long enough to rearrange not just furniture, but roles. I stood at the window and looked out at the yard, the tree I planted years ago standing taller now, roots deep and unmoved by what happened inside. My name was still on the papers, the bills, the mailbox, but the house felt leased back to me, conditional. Something shifted inside me, too, a clarity I hadn't had before. This wasn't about protecting anyone, it was about deciding who had authority, and it wasn't me anymore. I took one last look around at the neatness, the order, the quiet takeover, and the question settled without echoing. How long had they been planning this? The house didn't answer.
We sat at the table like we were waiting for a verdict, even though no one said that out loud. The chairs were pulled in evenly, the overhead light steady and bright, like it didn't want to miss anything. The house was quiet enough that I could hear electricity moving through the walls, a low hum reminding me this place was still alive. Her phone sat in the middle of the table again, face up this time. No hiding it, no soft placement. She pressed play without asking. The first recording started gentle, almost polite, a conversation I remembered as careful and balanced, one where I thought we were all listening. Hearing it back changed that. My voice sounded firmer than I felt back then. Her pauses felt longer, strategic. My son barely existed in it, a word here, a breath there. Nobody interrupted. That was the strangest part. She didn't explain, he didn't shift, I didn't defend myself. We just listened. One recording bled into the next, then another. Different days, but the same room, the same table, the same pattern repeating. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It settled, slow and quiet, like dust drifting down after something collapses in another room.
I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way she waited me out, how silence leaned in her favor, how my son faded when conversations turned uncomfortable. In my memory, I'd been measured, reasonable. On the recording, I sounded like someone standing alone while everyone else stepped back. That realization hurt more than the words themselves. She let the audio play all the way through. Every pause, every breath, every word spoken when I thought we were just talking like family. When it ended, the phone screen went dark and the room stayed still. No one rushed to fill the silence. She folded her hands. "I needed proof," she said calmly, "just in case things went left." The phrase landed heavy, like she'd already planned for the worst turn. I nodded once. I could have argued, said context mattered, said recordings strip away intention, said families don't keep evidence on each other, but nothing I said would change what we'd just heard. "What were you afraid of?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Losing stability," she said, and the word control hid right behind it. That's when my son finally spoke. "I was scared," he said, his voice cracking on the word. We both turned toward him, but he kept his eyes on the table. He said fear made him quiet, said he didn't know how to stop things once they started, said he didn't want it to blow up, he didn't want to choose sides. I looked at him and said softly, "You already did." He nodded. "I know." No excuses followed, no extra layers, just the truth sitting there between us, plain and heavy. I leaned back and let it settle in my chest. The hurt was still there, but something else was too. Clarity. For the first time, I wasn't guessing. I wasn't filling in blanks. I knew exactly where I stood. She pulled the phone closer to herself, like it belonged there now. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said. "I was being careful." I didn't argue. Some things don't need arguing. They just need acknowledging. "I believe you," I said, surprising both of them. "But that doesn't make this okay." She nodded once, tight and controlled. My son finally looked up at me, eyes tired and wet. "What happens now?" he asked. I thought about the lock, the recordings, the quiet planning that led us here. "I don't know yet," I said, and for once that felt honest. She stood first, picked up her phone, and said she was going to bed. She left without looking back. The house creaked softly as she moved down the hallway, doors opening and closing. It was just me and him then. He said he didn't mean for it to go this far. I told him that's usually how it happens. He said he loved me. I said I loved him too. Neither of those things fixed what had been broken. We sat there in silence, the house settling around us, until I stood and said I was tired. As I walked away, I realized I wasn't confused anymore. Everything I needed to know had already been played back, and standing there in the quiet, one question stayed with me, steady and unafraid. What's left to save here?
The sun was already lowering when I started packing. I didn't rush, I just moved. I grabbed the old bag with the soft straps and the zipper that liked to stick if you pulled too fast. It sat on the bed like it already knew what this was. I didn't turn on the overhead light. The room filled with that late afternoon glow, warm and forgiving, like it didn't want to witness too much. I folded clothes slowly. Not everything, just what fit, just what mattered enough to carry. A sweater I'd worn for years, shoes shaped by my feet, the book I kept meaning to finish. Each thing landed in the bag with a quiet thud. Final, but not dramatic. The house didn't react. No footsteps, no voices, no questions drifting down the hallway. It stayed still, and somehow that felt deliberate. I walked through the rooms one last time, not to say goodbye, just to make sure I wasn't forgetting myself. The living room looked neutral, balanced, like it could belong to anyone. I ran my hand along the back of the couch, cool fabric, familiar. It didn't hold on. In the kitchen, the table was empty.
No phone, no recordings, just clear space where words had once settled and been taken apart. The house had said everything it was going to say. I picked up my bag and headed for the door. My son stood in the hallway, smaller somehow, folded inward like he didn't know where to stand anymore. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded. He stepped forward and hugged me, holding on longer than usual, like he understood this moment would matter later. His shoulders shook once, then steadied. "I'm sorry," he said into my shoulder. I believed him. "I know," I said. That was enough. She stood in the doorway behind him, arms crossed, watching. Her face didn't give anything away. Not anger, not softness, just observation. She didn't speak. Neither did I. Some conversations end before they start. I opened the door and the evening air met me, cool and clean, crickets tuning up somewhere in the dark. The porch light stayed off, no flicker, no buzz. I paused at the top step and looked out at the street. The sky was streaked orange and blue, undecided. I took a breath. It felt lighter out here. Not happy, not free, just lighter. I walked down the steps, bag tapping softly against my hip, each step deliberate, grounded. I didn't look back. I put the bag in the trunk, closed it gently, and sat behind the wheel. For a moment, I just sat there. The house stayed quiet behind me. No movement in the windows, no change of heart. That told me everything. I started the engine and pulled away slow, letting the road stretch out ahead. I didn't know where I was going yet. That was okay. Sometimes you don't leave because you know the destination. You leave because staying makes it hard to breathe. The house slipped out of the mirror. Streetlights blinked on one by one. Some doors don't slam. They close quiet. And sometimes that's how you survive what's on the other side.